Hi, everyone. Welcome to Proudly Jewish Conversations on Israel and Jewish Identity. I'm Cantor Eyal Bitton. And as you know, many of my listeners and viewers, I started this podcast a few weeks after the massacre of October 7th as a way for members of my congregation in Portland, Oregon, to discuss and process what we had just witnessed. And I've been looking at this through various lenses, Jewish education, the media, and growth of anti-Semitism, and all kinds of angles. And today, I have a very special guest, Tania Shalom Michaelian, who is with the Society for Preservation of Israel Heritage Sites, also known as SPIHS. It's an Israeli NGO that was established for the purpose of locating, restoring, and preserving heritage sites in Israel that are symbolic of the rebirth of the Jewish state. And they're very involved in things that are related to Jewish history. And what we saw on October 7th was Jewish history. Another cycle in Jewish history that we've seen before and maybe thought we would never see again. Tania, welcome to Proudly Jewish. Thank you for joining me.
Hi, Eyal. Thank you for having me here.
Of course. Now,
you summed it up really well, what we're doing.
And we're still processing, aren't we? You're processing there in Israel. We're processing here in North America. And
Right.
I don't think we're going to get to the bottom of this anytime soon.
No, I think we're going to be speaking about this for years and years.
Yeah.
Our children will be speaking about it. It's probably one of the biggest things that happened to us as a people, as a country, forever, I think, for a long time.
Yeah. And you straddle that line. I don't know if it straddles the right word. There are people in the States, Jews in the States who, and non-Jews, who look at Israelis and they look at American Jews and see them as different and having some sort of overlap in some way. You made Aliyah from South Africa, and you have this experience of being a Jew in the diaspora world and being an Israeli Jew.
Sure.
And can you discuss or comment a bit on that fateful day, October 7th, and what chord it struck in you as a Jew and as an Israeli Jew?
That's right. I made Aliyah at the age of 21. I've actually spent more of my years in Israel than I did in South Africa. So I consider myself more Israeli than South African now. It took some time. I think on October 7th, it was the first time that I realized how connected I was to this country. I mean, I am, and my kids are Israeli, my husband is Israeli, my work here, my entire family lives here almost. But it was the first time that I felt that I've never been to the army because I was too old.
Right.
But it was the first time I felt like I'm Israeli, and whatever happens to this country is, this is my fate as an Israeli. And I think when I lived in the diaspora, we had this kind of bubble, we'd go to a Jewish school and we'd have our Hagim, but then we'd go out into the real world, and that was the real world. And then the Judaism was not, it wasn't you. In Israel, you are a Jew, you're an Israeli, and if something happens to the country, it happens to you.
Yeah.
And I think that's the difference. By living in the diaspora, you kind of protected from that. But when you're in Israel, it's the raw deal. And that's how I felt. Very, very raw.
I can't, there's so many occasions in life when we are in conversation and we like to connect to people and go, yes, I can relate to you in this way or that way. And I'm not Israeli. I didn't make Aliyah the way you did. And I can only imagine in theory what you're talking about. And as as you just did, in the sense that you couldn't have known what that would do to you as a Jew who was now Israeli, but now went through this. And that's profound. But we all went through something on October 7th, and whether we're here or there. Now, I want to come back to this. This is extremely important, I think, in particular to my audience that is essentially American and some Canadian Jews, and want to explore sort of how it relates to us over here. But first, tell me about SPIHS, this organization that you're in. I mentioned that it involves, heritage sites and what have you. First, tell me, what your involvement is and why you care.
Why I care? Well, first, I'll tell you what SPIHS is. You gave quite a great beginning, but SPIHS is the umbrella group for around 200 heritage sites in Israel. Many of the historical sites in Israel before 1700 are covered by their antiquity laws, but anything afterwards, they weren't really protected until about the 1980s when a new law came in, and the Society for the Preservation of Israel Heritage Sites, or SPIHS, which is what we like to call ourselves, took on many of the historical buildings that were being destroyed for high rises and development. The classic example was the Herzliya Gymnasia, which was a beautiful building, and it was knocked down, and in its place, the Shalom Tower was built, which is quite frankly a hideous building.
Oh.
Really, really ugly. And if you look back at the pictures of the gymnasia, it was just beautiful. And so many people went through the doors of that school, so many of our leaders, and it has such a rich history. And when that was knocked down, the founders of SPIHS decided, okay, we're coming in, we're going to take these heritage sites and tell their stories. And every single heritage site tells a story on our pathway to independence. It can be the historic home of of Ben Gurion, or it can be a hut in the middle of the desert, or every single heritage site tells a story, and together they make up the story of our history and our the years leading up to independence. So we're talking about from 1850 until about 1950. Those are the years that covered.
So one person might think, yes, I see the value of that. That's fantastic, wonderful, amazing. History is so important. And another person might look at this and say, okay, it's the past. We have to think to the future. We've got to build. We do need to build this, whether it was hideous or not. We need to think of the people today. And why preserve? What does that part of history do for someone today? What is that connection to the past?
Okay, so I can speak about up till October 7th, and especially after October 7th. You sitting where you're sitting, and I'm sitting on my moshav here in Israel. When you wake up in the morning, it's a given. Israel exists, right?
Yeah.
I wake up, it's a given. Israel exists, and we don't even have to think about it. But our grandparents and even our parents, it wasn't a given. Okay, they had to fight. And their grandparents, when they came to Israel, they had to, they had to drain the swamps, and they had to break ground that nobody even imagined that a spade could go through. And they built with their hands, and by going to these heritage sites, we understand what they went through. And I think if it wasn't there, we wouldn't understand what they had to go through, and realize that it really wasn't a given. It wasn't a given that we have a state. And post October 7th, I think it's 10 times more we have SPIHS hosts many soldiers and evacuees. We focused on those two groups because we really feel that they, more than anything, need to understand that they are part of a chain of warriors, of soldiers, of pioneers, of people went through what they're going through now. They are modern day heroes, and we want to we want to strengthen those roots and make them understand that they're fighting for something, and we got through it. We have a stake because of those people, and we'll get through this as well. But I think the heritage sites are absolute examples of I'm stumbling.
That's okay. They're reminders, perhaps. Are they reminders?
They're reminders. They're in your face reminders of what these people went through, and I think
go ahead.
It's something that you can't read about in a history book. I mean, you can,
yes,
but you're not going to get the same. You're not going to get the same feeling. You're not going to walk down a corridor that Ben Gurion walked down, or you're not going to go underground to a secret bullet factory and see where these brave people sat. It's there.
Yes,
it's right there.
We are the people of Zachor, Izkor. We're people of memory. Zachor et Yom HaShabbat v'shamor. Remember it and keep it, preserve it. And there is, when I posed that question, I was posing it in theory. I do see the value personally, but I think it's important to express it and remind ourselves of the importance of memory, why we hold on to the past or elements. It doesn't mean that we stay in the past. It means that we learn from it.
Not.
And we sit around doing the Haggadah for how long have we been doing that? These customs that we have from the temple days that we keep. There are reminders of where we came from. I have a 7-year-old daughter who just did some sort of family tree project at her Hebrew school, and has been asking all kinds of questions about my side and my wife's side, so that she knows who she is.
Right.
And that's essentially what you're saying. And right. And
you're saying it much better than I am. but yes, that's what I'm trying to say. And it's not because that it's 4,000 years ago we came out of Egypt. It's relevant today because it has that relevance. It's what they went through, we're going through now, and hopefully our children won't. But the chances are that we're going to have to keep fighting for this land.
Now, do you feel that you mentioned some of what you do today for I don't know if survivors are the right word, but is the right word, but people who are impacted by October 7th, evacuees, you said, and I don't remember who else you said, but soldiers. Can you tell us a little bit more about what you do, what these projects are, and do they realize a little bit more about their place in history or the importance of the past, the recent past? It's a lot of questions to unpack, but take one of them, please, and run with it.
You might have to remind me about the second part.
So let's start with what are some of the projects that you actually are doing to interact with these soldiers and evacuees? And what are these? How many evacuees are we talking about? What happened to them? Right.
Okay, so the numbers are. Nobody's sure exactly. It depends how you define evacuees. But the numbers are around 250,000 Israelis are currently displaced. Wow. Some of them have started going back to their communities very recently, but I'd say until at least 2 weeks ago, we're talking about 250,000 people who have had to leave their homes, communities, their jobs, their everything. Children, of course, had to leave their frameworks. And from about the second or the third day after October 7th, the educational team from SPIHS got together and built a program that essentially took heritage-related content to these emergency centers.
Yeah.
In the beginning, it was just to provide respite to the people. You have these traumatized communities, not knowing what's going to happen tomorrow. Children who witnessed the most horrific things. Fathers, mothers who have been dragged off to the war because 300,000 people are in reserve and are fighting this war. And we came and we started working with the children in the beginning, and then slowly it developed into working with all age groups. We had teenagers who refused to leave their rooms because they were so frightened, and we had old people who had been uprooted from the communities, and they didn't know where their next meal was coming from. We have all these horrific stories, and our team started working with these children. So what we do in theory is bring crafts, we bring stories, we bring games, all related to heritage. We tell stories about resilience. We kind of take the target audience and build a program around them. For the older audiences, we have heritage site managers come and speak to them, give them lectures about specific sites, historical events, and it's a very, very, very broad thing. We're talking about 70 heritage sites that are taking part in this whole program. So one part is going to them. It's called We Go to You. And then the other thing is bringing groups of evacuees from the emergency centers to the heritage sites that are open. This is done for free. We organize buses. So it's very dynamic as well. As things are starting to change, of course, our content is being incorporated into schools that have been set up for evacuee children. So, it's a diverse range of things that we're doing for evacuees. And for soldiers, it's the same, really. We of course, not the arts and crafts side, but of it. We bring them to the heritage sites, and I remember your second part of the question now, which is what it does to them, right? Is that the question?
Something like that. Yes, that's right.
Yeah. So with soldiers, we've seen it's absolutely remarkable. They come out like understanding, this is what we're fighting for. It gives them, it's amazing, a huge boost of morale of, hey, my grandfather was here at this kibbutz. My grandmother helped, build this moshav, and I'm going out to fight, and it does amazing things. And
that personal connection to your history again, and why you're right. Now you mentioned resilience, and I read an article that you wrote, I believe, on Kibbutz Yad Mordechai. And can you tell us a little bit about some of the challenges that they're facing there, and also, because I believe you also touch about Israel's sense of continuity and resilience in this article, and how. So tell us about that kibbutz Yad Mordechai, and how it how resilience is, how they're showing resilience.
So I think out of all the communities in the Western Negev were affected. Obviously some more than others, but I think Yad Mordechai is so symbolic because they have the biggest Holocaust museum in the southern area of Israel. So already it has that connection. Also, it was named after Mordechai Anielewicz, who was one of the leaders of the Warsaw Ghetto uprising. Mordechai Yad Mordechai. So already it has a connection to the Holocaust, and very symbolically, a rocket went through the roof of the museum, right into the exhibit of the Warsaw Ghetto.
Oh wow! Right.
It was Mila 18 of the headquarters of the Warsaw Ghetto uprising, and I think that says it all. It's like it was such an incredible, unfortunately it happened, but when you see the pictures of the rocket through the roof.
Yeah.
Yad Mordechai was attacked by two groups of terrorists. Thankfully, thank God, nobody was killed on the kibbutz. Their security teams managed to hold them off. And I think what makes this story interesting is that many of the people who were part of that security team were children and grandchildren of the original founders of the kibbutz.
Right.
The history of the kibbutz is that they were attacked by Egyptian army troops in the War of Independence. The kibbutz was eventually overrun, and the people had to evacuate. And so this ties in also with the fact that today the people of Yad Mordechai are evacuated. They're now living in Hadera and Netanya. So
Yeah.
you have people who had to evacuate twice in their lifetime. So this, we were speaking about the continuation, how history repeats itself. Yeah, the story is so classically Israel. It's such it encapsulates everything that we're speaking about, how the heritage sites are so connected to what's happening today, and especially October 7th.
I see.
The resilience is the fact that the kibbutz was founded by people who came out of the Holocaust. They fought in the War of Independence. Many of them were killed. Children were killed. They fought through every single war in Israel, and their grandchildren are fighting today. Some of them in Gaza, some of them in the emergency teams. And I interviewed quite a few people for this article, and every single one said, the minute we're given the permission to come back, we're going home.
Wow.
And I said, well, rockets, Hamas, and there was just no question about it. Like, we built this kibbutz. This is home, and we're staying.
This is,
and I think this
it's
resilience,
sorry,
and
go
you
ahead.
hear it all the time. No, I'm just saying it's not only Yod Mordechai, but they are, they're a reflection of what's happening in Israel.
And this is a fundamental misunderstanding to go out of the specifics of what you're saying here. It's a fundamental misunderstanding that I see and hear in the West from academics, from students, from activists, from the Free Palestine activists as well, which is we're going to pressure the Jews to leave and go back to where they came from, or something like that. And there's the fundamental misunderstanding is this is home for the Jews. And
it's no other home.
There is no other home in the Eretz Acheret, right? And this is fundamental to everything. And I hear what you're saying about the resilience, and it is, even though intellectually I get that, it's profound and moving when you see that in these people who just experienced and witnessed horrible things that I would say that no one has seen since the Holocaust, and they're willing to stand their ground and go, no, this is home.
No, this is home. October 7th we had this existential threat. Okay, it was the first. I think maybe before the 6-Day War, some people felt that, but this was, some of the communities, we only got control. We got back control of after a few days only. So there were many days in the beginning of, where's this going? What's happening? There was a lot of anxiety and a lot of stress. Of course, there still is, but the fear of the people. But then at the same time, you're like, well, what else can we do? We have to stand and fight. This is our home. There's nothing else. There's nowhere else. This is our home.
I see it as an existential threat. I get that. And I think that many of my viewers and listeners do as well. And I get many comments from people on my YouTubes, from people who don't get it. So can you explore a little bit, in what way, how did you know? What made it go, I see, they're trying, like, what is it about October 7th that clarified, or that you would place and say in the category of existential threat? This is what this is.
First of all, I cannot understand anybody who doesn't get it. But I guess, okay,
Yep.
I'm not judging, but I get it.
You have a right to an opinion. Yeah.
But I think what made this different was, I mean, we've been bombarded by rockets and missiles since I've come to Israel. I've been through 3 wars, and I can't count how many operations from Gaza. And it involves going to the bomb shelter, and you kind of get used to it. And this time, I think the barbarism and the hatred, and also the fact that everything was put onto social media so quickly.
Yeah.
It defied everything that we knew. It changed the way we saw the enemy. The enemy is people who send rockets and try to kill innocents. But this, for the first time, you could understand how. Well, you can't understand how, but
Right.
there's a face to it. I think that's the thing, that there's a face to the enemy who is coming with a gun and shooting a baby in the head, or taking a bread knife and cutting the head of a soldier. And it hits you in the gut.
Yeah.
I mean, I can tell you, my daughter lives on an army base somewhere in Israel, and recently, I think on Friday, there was a terror attack very near her base. And I was speaking to my father, and I said, she was right there. And he said, oh, it was only shooting. I thought it was a missile. So
Right.
things get
Right.
like, what I'm trying to say, not very successfully, but I'm trying to say that this time around, the hatred had a face, I think.
Yes.
And you understand that it's not just this group of this mob that came through. They represent an entire world of haters. They could be living in not only Gaza, really. We're living in other countries, but they don't
Yeah.
want us here.
They don't
just
want
don't
you
want
here.
us here.
Yes. Right.
And we have to work very hard to make sure that doesn't happen.
Yeah. And the one thing I've heard a lot about, to get into, I don't know if it's politics, but I know that people have criticized Netanyahu for various reasons. But one thing that I heard, and it's not just Netanyahu, but there's a whole line of thought that existed pre-October 7th, where, okay, the thought was, okay, Hamas is bad. They commit acts of terror, and they ultimately would prefer to stay in power and have prosperity and just continue living than risk it all out of hatred and do something catastrophic like what we saw October 7th. And then October 7th happened, and they realized, oh, no, they are purely genocidal, and they're not interested in having any semblance of governance or something like that. I think that difference, and then when you're not interested in governance and maintaining power, but you're just lashing out, that's what you said, that face of I was going to say evil, but cruelty, and
Well, you
we
can
will do
say it.
anything. Right. And what
I'm
Hamas
taking
is
the liberty of saying that it's evil. It's pretty
evil.
evil. Yeah.
I think, well, here in the outside non-Israeli world, Jewish world, I think that's what struck the chord here. There was echoes of the Holocaust. It was a pogrom, is what we saw. And they do want to get rid of the Jews from Israel, and at any cost. And when they say they want to do it, it looks like that, like what we saw on October 7th. And over here, we also saw an explosion of anti-Semitism, a huge wave of people that basically did not hold these Hamas barbarians to account, but rather, in essence, excused their actions and upheld their goals. There's no condemnations of the hostage taking, no condemnations, not enough of those. But this has been, from people that I've talked to in the Jewish world here,
Yeah.
Shocking and very upsetting. And there's students, many of them have students and children who are students in universities and have to subdue or hide their Judaism, their Jewish identity. And let me clarify, because what I've noticed is that these activists will say, no, I have nothing against Jews. It's Zionists I don't like, or something like this. And it's an attack on Jewish identity. It's saying, we will accept you, Jew, if you are simply a religion. But if you have this national identity that's tied to any sort of indigenous roots, you are rejected. Now, I've crossed over into sort of the North American experience or certainly the diaspora experience, and I've touched on anti-Semitism. So my question to you is, how aware would you say the average Israeli Jew was pre-October 7th about the anti-Semitism that exists in the outside world and post-October 7th? Has that changed? That sense of like, oh, they think this. Are they aware? Because you're in Israel dealing with a real hatred and a real problem. You're not in a complete bubble, but you're also not here. Would you say that Israeli Jews were aware of this anti-Semitism, or if that knowledge has changed since October 7th?
I think that just by the fact that we have internet news and probably most Israelis have family abroad.
Yeah.
So, just by default, they understand what's happening. I don't think to the depth of what, now it's much, I think Israelis are more aware, and I think they actually feel sorry in a way for the diaspora Jews, because it's really tough. It's really tough from what we're doing, but from what we're seeing, all the pro-Palestinian marches and what we're seeing in London and New York and Washington. I don't know how Israelis would deal with that. It's quite shocking. I mean, I'll tell you from a SPIHS point of view, we host many missions, volunteer missions that are coming from North America, and the stories that we hear, it's heartbreaking, and I think it's ironic in a way, because what Israel went through is like, you can't get more heartbreaking than that. But it must be really tough to live in a reality where you have to hide who you are. In Israel, with all the problems, we're Jewish, we're free, we can say what we can practically say what we want, do what we want as a Jew.
Right.
And I think it would be, for myself personally, I think that would be, like a deal breaker. I don't think I could live in a country where I would have to hide my identity. And it's heartbreaking.
Yeah.
So yeah.
You basically answered. I'm sorry?
No, I'm saying I think Israelis are more aware and do feel sorry for.
And that's amazing I don't think anyone that I know of in the States would think that Israelis would feel sorry for them. Right?
Really?
I don't think so. I could be wrong. I've been wrong before in my life, very few times, but no, right. But I don't think that that's what we're thinking here. I don't think so.
Yeah.
I think we're thinking, and I'd be curious to hear what my viewers have to say in the comments and what have you. But I think they'd say, oh, things are bad here, but I'm not in a war. I'm safe from physical danger to that extent. And to hear,
in a way, they're right. I mean,
right.
They're not in a war, and what Israel went through is really horrific, and it's not easy to live here. But on a day-to-day basis, I think that I still prefer. I'm speaking personally for myself. I live in Israel. I speak to people, and this is the feedback that I'm getting. People watch the news and they go, "Did you see what happened in London? There's poor people, the poor Jews. I'd really hate to be Jewish in London slash whatever.
Yeah.
Fill in the blanks." And that's what I'm hearing.
What you said about how Israeli Jews feel versus how we feel over here reminds me, and I've mentioned this before in another podcast. There's a philosopher, an artist who I think was from Libya and spoke French, and he's passed away, named Herbert Pagani. And he gave this recitation about anti-Semitism in the world. This is in the 1970s. And in the end, he concludes with, Descartes had it wrong. It's not, I think, therefore I am. It's, I defend myself, therefore I am, which is a bit more of the, not just Israeli ethos, but any country that wants that, any country that's independent needs to be able to protect itself. And that's, the Jew out in the diaspora is part of another larger system, not focused on defending just the Jew. So I'm reminded of that. And that springboards to my next point, which is South Africa. You grew up in South Africa.
Did.
We just saw this, terrible. I was going to call it a kangaroo court. I don't think it was a kangaroo court, but I think that the premise for the whole hearing was a farce, and it was brought to the court by South Africa, this place that you grew up in. So, can you touch upon that? What you just said before about this experience of being free to be you as a Jew. What's that experience like with your own experience in South Africa versus here, and what you see has come of your country, the country you grew up in today? Yeah. Again, in 5 words or less, instead of writing a book. No, these are big questions, but
they're big questions. As I said, it's a sore point. I love South Africa. My brother still lives there, and it's the country of my birth. You can never. It's South Africa.
You have a soft spot for it. Yes.
Very.
Yeah.
I grew, I was a teenager in the 1980s when the changes happened. I was at marches against apartheid. That was my defining experience as a teen, marching for the freedom of Mandela, and then this. It's really it's a sore point. I'm saying the word heartbreaking too many times, but that's basically what I feel. I've been feeling since October 7. When I see these people sitting in this kangaroo court, as you call it, or maybe not, this court with all these dignitaries and all these people who are so educated and you just look at them and think, my God. And it's South Africa, so it's like a double whammy for me. It's like, you're attacking me and my country, but it's my country that's attacking me and my country. So it's my country because I still see myself as South African, right? Even though I'm more Israeli. It's hard to see. I actually couldn't bring myself to watch the court case itself. I turned the TV off.
No, I hear you. And here's another reason to cry your beloved country, right?
Alan Payton would be turning in his grave.
Boy, oh boy. So as we look to the future, as you look to the future of Israel.
God, please God.
Yeah, there is, okay, we mentioned there's an existential threat.
Yeah.
I would argue that it's not over yet. That existential threat continues today, and not just merely with Hamas, but with the ICJ court that we just saw, the international court, the efforts that are happening internationally. Yeah. What gives you hope? What do you think in your crystal ball is going to happen? I don't mean necessarily every political, turn of events, but overall, how does Israel fare, and what's the future for Israel? Positive, negative, and and what do you feel?
So I'm not going to touch on politics.
Yeah,
We're not going to go there. I have something to say about it, but I'm not going to.
yeah,
But I think if anything good came out of this war, it's the fact that we understand what an incredible, incredible nation we have, and the people who sacrifice so much. And I'm not talking only about the kids that went off to the war, all gung ho, because that's what 19-year-olds do. It's the 35-year-olds who left their businesses and their children and everything and led these kids. And we're talking about people who closed their businesses and went, to volunteer for soldiers. So every single person in this country is part of this amazing, amazing nation and people. And I think that with the people that we have an amazing future.
yeah,
We might not be able to stop the rockets, although hopefully we do have the military strength to do so. But that's not what is going to win the war for us. What's
yeah,
going to win the war is obviously the fact that we don't have a choice, but also because we just are. We are Israel. We are our ancestors. We are the people who died in the Holocaust. We are the people who are going to be born, and we have a responsibility to keep this going for them and for our grandparents and for people as far back as Abraham. We are part of this link, and that is the answer, I think, to any question of threat. That's our answer. We are them, and we
that's,
have that responsibility to keep going for them.
that's beautifully said, Tanya. And another positive thing to add to what you just said from over here regarding Am Israel, not just Medinat Israel, not just the state of Israel. I have seen, I've lived in various Jewish communities in North America, and I've been exposed to Jewish communities that feel very, very strongly connected to Israel in the sense that this is our homeland. We're, whether we live here or there or that, this is our ancestral homeland, and it's a part of our Jewish identity. Okay. And I've also been exposed to communities where it's not as innate. And I would say that, as disturbing as that might be to hear for an Israeli, October 7th, for those people who were didn't already have that, October 7th was and I can't say for everybody, but I've seen it happen at a large scale, that there was an awakening, a realization, whatever I might think as an American Jew, let's say, about the politics of this country over there, this has a direct impact on the Jewish people, and the anti-Semitism that I see, the nature of what that October 7th attack was, makes me realize that I have an unbreakable bond.
Sure.
I can't run away from that. It's a bond with this homeland, and I can't see the homeland. I can't sit by as the homeland as the efforts towards destroying the homeland take place. So I think that to summarize and to add to what you said, in addition to this sense of unity and resilience that you described that Israel has, there's been the same thing, I think, with Am Israel and its connection, this link I think the word was that you used, this link to our past, to Israel, to our shared past. And this is what you're doing with SPIHS in many ways. And perhaps you can say a final word about SPIHS's role in upcoming role, and what SPIHS is doing, short term and long term. I think you've perhaps already touched on this, but what's the road to kind of healing or rebuilding?
Okay, so it's the physical and the emotional rebuilding, of course. The physical is the fact that we have 18 heritage sites in the Western Negev. Most of them were damaged, some worse than others. All of them had to close. So we're talking about financial damage as well. So we've mapped these sites, and we have plans to not only rehabilitate the physical damage, but also to upgrade exhibits and make new movies and make them more relevant to October 7th and onwards, because it's a continuation of from the time that these kibbutzim and moshavim were established in the Negev in the 1940s. It's a continuation of the wars and the things that the people went through and the pioneers. And today people are still living on the Gaza frontier. They are pioneers. They are modern day pioneers. No. Who obviously, unfortunately, went through what they went through on October 7th. And I think that our sites have to reflect that. Also, many of our sites will have commemoration of the people who died. I can take Sderot as an example, where 80 people were killed, countless injured. And we have something called the Sderot Founders House, which tells the story of the history of Sderot. How this tiny little transit camp turned into a flourishing city. But the story of Sderot didn't end, with independence, and it didn't end on October 7th, and it will continue. So we want to make the sites more relevant today. And of course, every heritage site is an economic engine for the region that it works in. So we're talking about tourism, we're talking about the people that it employs, we're talking about the visitors that come in. So we have plans to upgrade them and hopefully turn them into more important historic sites, more relevant, so that they can continue to tell the story of the Western Negev. I haven't touched on what's happening in the north. Yeah. We don't know the extent of the damage there because it's an ongoing conflict. Time will tell.
So Tania Shalom Michaelian of the Society for Preservation of Israel Heritage Sites, thank you so much for joining me today on Proudly Jewish.
Thank you so much for having me.